In the winter of 2009, a man named Marcus Lemonis was sitting in an office that felt considerably smaller than it had 2 years earlier. The automotive dealership business his family had built over decades was struggling in ways that felt unsurvivable. The financial crisis that had begun in 2008 had not just slowed car sales, it had collapsed them. People who had been planning to buy new vehicles were not buying them. People who had been planning to trade up were holding on to what they had. The showrooms that had once felt busy felt empty in a way that went beyond just slow traffic. They felt like a different world than the one the business had been built for. His personal finances reflected the business environment. Approximately $50,000 in credit card debt had accumulated. Income that had previously felt reliable had become unreliable and then scarce. The future of everything he had been working toward felt genuinely uncertain in a way that is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. Not the vague uncertainty of normal business risk. The specific, concrete uncertainty of not knowing whether the thing you have built is going to survive the next 12 months. What he did in that period is the reason I'm telling you this story, because what he did was not what most people do when their industry collapses around them. He did not cut expenses and wait for conditions to improve. He did not double down on the thing that was failing. He did not spend his energy trying to convince himself or others that the situation was temporary. He got curious, specifically and deliberately curious about something that most people in his position never think to examine. He started studying the businesses around him that were not collapsing. Not the automotive businesses, other businesses. Businesses in completely different industries that were somehow navigating the same economic environment and coming out the other side with their revenue intact, or even growing. He was looking for a pattern that existed across industries, something that explained survival in a way that was not specific to any single sector. What he found would become the thesis that drove everything he built afterward. And it started with a surprisingly simple observation. The businesses that were surviving the 2008 and 2009 downturn almost uniformly had one thing in common. They sold things that people needed to purchase repeatedly, not big-ticket items that required financing and significant decision-making. Consumables, food, supplies, products that needed to be replenished on a regular cycle regardless of what the broader economy was doing. People had stopped buying cars. They had not stopped buying groceries. They had not stopped buying pet food. They had not stopped buying the everyday supplies that their lives depended on. The recurring purchase protected the revenue in a way that the single large purchase simply could not. But here's where the observation became genuinely useful rather than merely interesting. Lemonis did not just notice that consumable businesses were surviving, he noticed something about the ones that were struggling even within that category. The ones that were failing despite selling products people genuinely needed and wanted were almost uniformly failing for the same reason. Not because the product was bad, not because the market did not exist, because the operations were broken. Good food, terrible management. Great product, no inventory system. Strong customer loyalty, no financial controls. The businesses were sitting on real opportunities that they were squandering because the people running them were good at making something or growing something or cooking something, but had no framework for building a business around what they made. This is where Lemonis had the insight that changed everything. He realized something about himself that most people in his position never take the time to examine. He was not a car guy. He had been working in the automotive industry, but the automotive industry was not where his actual skill lived. His skill was operations. He was exceptionally good at looking at a business with broken systems and building the systems that made it work. Inventory management, staff accountability, financial controls, customer experience consistency, the operational infrastructure that turns a good product into a scalable business. That skill was not industry specific, it was transferable to any business in any category. He bought his first struggling business outside the automotive industry for almost nothing. It was a small food company with genuine products and genuinely broken operations. He installed basic operational frameworks inventory tracking, cost controls, defined staff responsibilities, clear financial reporting, revenue improved. The business became profitable. He sold it at a meaningful profit and used that capital to do it again with a different business in a different category. Then he did it again and again, each time learning something new about a different industry, a different customer base, a different set of operational challenges, each time applying the same underlying framework that he had identified in himself during those difficult months of 2009. Each time generating returns that funded the next acquisition. Within a decade, the portfolio of companies he had built and operated, and in some cases sold, had a combined valuation that placed him in a category he could not have imagined during those dark months of credit card debt and empty showrooms. Over $500 million, not from a revolutionary product, not from a technological breakthrough, not from a lucky investment or a fortunate connection, from a clear, repeatable framework applied consistently across a decade of deliberate work. Now here's the part of the story that I want you to think about carefully, because it is the part that most retellings of success stories skip entirely. Marcus Lemonis did not succeed because he was smarter than the people running the businesses he acquired. The owners of those struggling companies were often deeply knowledgeable about their products, their customers, and their industries. They had worked harder than most people work. They had taken real risks and made real sacrifices to build what they had built. They were not failing because of any personal inadequacy. They were failing because they were trying to do something they had not identified as specifically theirs to do. They were trying to be everything their business needed simultaneously. The product expert and the operations manager and the financial controller and the marketing strategist and the HR department. And no single person, regardless of how talented or hardworking, can sustainably be all of those things at once without a framework. What Lemonis brought was not superior intelligence or superior work ethic. He brought specificity. He knew precisely what he was good at, could articulate it clearly, and could apply it methodically to situations where it was needed. That specificity is what made him effective across industries he had no prior experience in. The operational framework was the constant. The industry was just the context. This is the part of the story that is directly applicable to you. Not because you are necessarily going to build a portfolio of acquired companies, though some of you will, but because the underlying principle, getting radically specific about what you actually do well and finding context where that thing is genuinely needed, is the foundation of almost every successful business I have studied at every scale, in every industry. Most businesses that fail do not fail because the product is bad or the market does not exist. Most businesses that fail do so because the person running them never got specific about what they were actually selling. Not the product, not the service, the actual value transfer that happens when someone pays them money. What problem does the customer have before they engage you? What is their situation after? The difference between those two states is what you are actually selling. And until you can articulate that difference with precision, you are operating with a fundamental strategic ambiguity that will undermine everything else you do. Lemonis was not selling cars. He was not selling food. He was not selling pet supplies. He was selling operational transformation. The clarity of that positioning allowed him to evaluate opportunities rationally, communicate his value to potential partners and acquisition targets, and build a consistent track record across wildly different industries. The positioning was the business. The specific companies were expressions of it. The second principle embedded in the story is about the relationship between failure and information. Most people study successful businesses, they read about what worked, analyze the decisions that led to good outcomes, and try to reverse engineer the strategy. This is useful, but incomplete. Lemonis spent an enormous amount of time studying businesses that were failing, not because failure is interesting in some abstract philosophical sense, but because failing businesses reveal something that successful businesses obscure. They reveal where the floor is. They show you what problems are common enough, persistent enough, and painful enough that customers will tolerate genuinely inadequate solutions rather than go without. That tolerance is a business opportunity. Wherever customers are accepting a bad experience because the alternative is no experience at all, there is a gap that a competent operator can fill. Finding those gaps requires studying failure as seriously as you study success. The third principle is perhaps the most practically important and the most consistently misunderstood. The first customer is not a revenue milestone. The first customer is a proof of concept. It is the answer to the only question that actually matters in the early stage of any business. Is there a real problem here that a real person will pay real money to solve? No business plan answers that question. No market research report answers it. No pitch deck, no competitive analysis, no financial projection answers it. One customer who found you, understood what you offered, and gave you money for it answers it. Everything before that transaction is hypothesis. Everything after it is evidence. Lemonis did not build a theory about operational transformation and then spend years refining it before testing it in the market. He found one business where the problem was obvious, applied his framework, and let the outcome tell him whether the framework was real. It was. He did it again. The evidence accumulated. The confidence that came from that accumulating evidence was not the fragile confidence of someone who believes in an untested idea. It was the durable confidence of someone who has seen a framework work in multiple contexts and understands why it works. From $50,000 in credit card debt to a portfolio valued at over $500 million. Not in a single dramatic moment. Not through a single brilliant decision. Through a clear framework applied consistently across a decade of deliberate work in markets where that framework was genuinely needed. The framework is available to you. The specificity is available to you. The first customer is one conversation away. The question is not whether the opportunity exists. The question is whether you are willing to get specific enough about what you actually do well to go find it. Next week on Quiet Rich, I'm covering the financial mistakes that most small business owners make in their first 2 years, the specific ones that are nearly impossible to recover from, and the ones that are entirely avoidable with the right framework in place before you make them. Subscribe so you do not miss it. New videos every Tuesday and Friday.